I'd like to welcome you all to this special video conference. My name is Janine Lim. I coordinate video conferencing in Southwest Michigan, and I'm part of the partnership that has brought this to you. I'm bridging the video conference, and also I'll be facilitating, which means I'll be calling on the schools to ask their questions. This project is also brought to you by Gail Dessler at Elk Grove Unified School District, and she has done a lot of the coordination, and of course this couldn't happen without that. And then our presenter today is at Wayne Risa in Detroit, Michigan, and hosted by Stephen Michael. So thank you to everyone who has helped make this happen. I'd like to also welcome, we have two schools interacting today, Monterey Trail High School in Elk Grove, California, and Edward Harris Junior Middle School, also in Elk Grove, California. We do have some other schools that will be watching this later, so we just want to give a shout out to them and greet them. We also have here at my site a collection of several of our local veterans, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam veterans who do video conferences with us, and they are watching this or will be watching a recording of it later because our weather is a little crazy today, and so we welcome all of them. We also are expecting Mr. George Porter, who's also a World War II veteran, and Mrs. Edith Roberts, and I think they'll be in a little later, and we'll have them say hello to you as well. So we're glad that you could participate with us in this video conference. So what we're going to do is start with a short introduction from our presenter, Mr. Alexander Jefferson.
Alexander Jefferson, Lieutenant Colonel, retired, United States Air Force, former school teacher, born in Detroit, Michigan, 1921, Chadsey High School graduate of Clark College in Atlanta, Georgia, and a year at Howard University. Went into the Army Air Corps in 1943, graduated as a second lieutenant January 44. Went overseas and joined the 332nd Fighter Group in June of 44, and I flew 18 long-range missions escorting B-17s, B-24s from Italy to Germany, Italy to Ploesti. I was shot down on August the 12th, 1944, while strafing radar stations on the coast of southern France, right outside the city of Toulon. I spent 9 months in Germany as a prisoner of war, liberated by General Patton's Third Army in April 45. Back to Detroit, became a school teacher, and suffered 35 years of teaching mama's dear little darlings. I was an elementary science teacher, and retired in 1980, and been on the road talking about Tuskegee Airmen for umpteen years. That's what I'm doing today. Thank you for me, and I'll go on from there in detail anymore.
All right, so let's get into questions. We're going to start with Edward Harris. Let's hear your first question.
After being captured, did you still want to go back into the war?
You know, today I'm going to answer this in a roundabout manner. Today we are caught with this Monday morning quarterbacking. How did you feel? Were you hurt? You've got to understand, World War II was a completely different attitude and different. Germany, Japan were the enemy. I was fighting for my country. This is my country. I go back to great-great-great-grandfathers, grandmothers, 1815. Therefore, this is my country. I fight for my country. Nobody who comes over here in 1920 through Ellis Island and tries to tell me to go back to Africa. I have parents, and as Chappie James used to say, this is my country. I'll fight for her. I'll defend her, but I'll make her treat me the way she should. And all my life has been fighting for the right to fight. Civil rights movements, resulting today in Obama, But fighting for this country has always been what I've always done, and I'll continue to do.
Let's go over to Monterey and hear your first question.
After experiencing a death of a friend, did you try not to make many more because you thought that they would die?
You have friends and people die every day. I'm not trying to be morbid. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to be morbid. But you see, there's more to life than a particular friend. There are other people, other things, and other objectives in life. What's an old saying? One monkey doesn't stop a show. Life goes on. We lose friends every day. And to tell you the truth, I'm at the stage where I've lost a lot of friends. Because today, out of the 1,000 men who got their wings, and black men who got their wings and were pilots in World War II, only 150 of us are still living. We're losing friends every day. So consequently, when we lost friends in combat, we were too busy trying to save our own. We didn't have time enough to cry. Now, this didn't mean we're hard-hearted. Don't get me wrong. No, we felt deeply and grievous when we lose a friend. Hope I covered that. Another question, please.
Have you ever been shot to where like you couldn't walk for a long time?
No. Never been shot physically. I've never been shot physically. The airplane was hit. Germans are firing at us, and the shell came up through the floor and went out through the top of the canopy. But I've never been injured and never experienced any fight. Never. When I bailed out, I got scratches and bruises going down through the trees. Yeah. Time to show them that now? It's kind of hard to see, but it's kind of dark. That's me. By the way, I drew this picture approximately a month after it happened. I'm sitting in a prisoner of war camp, and I had plenty of paper because International Red Cross was in the prison camp. We had paper, crayon, all kinds of things. The Germans didn't mind. I drew this picture showing me, this is my airplane, and these are the radar stations that we were firing at. And this is 1, 2, 3, 4. And when I went right across the top of the target at about 400 miles an hour, firing at this radar station, shell came up through the floor. These guys here shooting at us, shell came up through the floor. I pulled up off the deck. I don't know how high I got, maybe 800 feet, maybe 1,000. And when I came out, I drew this picture. I remember fire of the tail going by, and I pulled, see me right here? I pulled a D-ring, got a big D-ring, hooked up to the parachute because I'm sitting on the parachute. The parachute's underneath the bottom. And when I pulled the D-ring and the parachute popped open, I'm in the trees. Everything is green. Number 1 and number 3, they get through, and they look back and they saw my airplane go into the ground and explode. They didn't see me get out. And so consequently, when they got back to the squadron, they thought I was killed. And my parents got a KIA telegram. What's KIA? Anybody holler it out?
Killed in action.
Yes. And my parents didn't find out about me until a month later when the International Red Cross was in the camp and sent a message back to my parents that I was a POW. This is the camp that I was in. The barbed wire around the outside. These are the barracks. There are about 10 to 15 rooms, a hall down the middle of each barracks, and rooms off on each side. I was in a room with 10 other men, with 9 other men, the 10 of us together, and we had triple bunks. There they are. See the triple bunks? Here's a stove to heat. And I literally sat the war out. The only thing that was bad, I didn't have very much food. Because the Germans didn't have very much food, the war was on. We got potatoes from them every day and boiled cabbage. That's why I hate cabbage today. I hate cabbage. But potatoes and cabbage, but for International Red Cross food parcels. That's why I contribute to the International Red Cross today. I contributed to, because if it were not for the International Red Cross, I only lost 5 pounds during the 9 months I was there. Some of the men who had been there for 2.5 or 3 years, they lost 15 and 20 pounds. By the way, we were not tortured, no beatings, because to tell you the truth, the Germans knew everything about me. They knew that I came out of Tuskegee High School in Detroit. They had all my marks. They knew I went to Clark College in Atlanta. They had all my marks. I did a year at Howard University in Washington, D.C. They had all my marks. Somebody said, oh, by the way, they knew how much taxes my dad paid on his house. I lived in Detroit. You say, I wonder why, wonder how. Back during World War II, ironically, before World War II, there was a thing called a political party called the German Bund. And the German Bund was never put in jail like the Japanese were put in jail. The Nisi, the American Japanese, and California were put in jail. But the Germans were here sending stuff back to Germany. Their intelligence, all during the war, before the war and after the war. I was told that in this camp there were 10,000 white officers who had been shot down over German occupied territory. Because every time a B-17 went down, and your history will show this, they lost 50 and 60 B-17s every other day. Every B-17 had a pilot, a co-pilot, a navigator, and a bombardier, 4 officers, and 6 enlisted men, making up to 10. The officers went to this camp that I was in. The enlisted men went to a separate camp. The Geneva Convention, which controlled us, our capture, our conduct. The Geneva Convention says, you do not make officers work. I simply sat in that prison camp. I sat the war out. No beatings, no torture. I was treated as an officer and a gentleman, even though I'm black. In that prison camp, there were only 7 of us in that prison camp. 7 out of 10,000. So there was no discrimination. There wasn't enough of us to discriminate. When I got back, I came back to the United States, back to discrimination, segregation, and all the rest of the things that I happened to fight with the rest of the people in 1950, 1960, 1970, 1980, and helped to bring this country back to the place where it is today. It's all part of life. It's all which we're still fighting today. Oh, yak. So you get me started. I get to yak and yak. Get another
That's okay.
question.
They're good stories. We like the stories. Let's hear another question. We'll go to Monterey.
Why do you think your squad was so successful?
Oh, yeah, I know what you mean. We have a sort of history of never losing a bomber to enemy fighters. Okay, now wait a minute. Let me back up. Hold tight. That is a misnomer. Once again, guys and gals, it's been said that the Tuskegee Airmen never lost a bomber to German fighters. That is a misnomer. We lost darn few. Very few. Only because we had a commanding officer, Colonel Benjamin Oliver Davis, Jr. Colonel Davis was our commanding officer. He came out of West Point in 1936. And while he was at West Point for 4 years, from 1932 to 1936, they gave him the silent treatment. He was the only black man in West Point. They only spoke to him when it was official. When he went into dinner, he had to go to the end of the table, and he had to ask for permission to sit down to eat dinner. Many times he was refused. Had a room by himself. He caught hell, but he persisted, and when he graduated, he came out on the top third, within the top third of his class in 1936. He was our commanding officer. He went through and he graduated in the first class out of Tuskegee Army Airfield in March of 1942, and he was programmed to be the commanding officer of the 332nd Fighter Group over in Italy. I remember you get up in the morning, 5 o'clock, shave, bathe, go to breakfast, go into the room for briefing room, and you sit there with that big map on the wall, and you see that red line going from Italy up into Germany, and when you pull the curtain back, everybody says, oh, God, another mission. And when we go out, you get your parachute and you go out. At the door, Colonel Davis is standing there and he says, gentlemen, quote, I remember these words, gentlemen, stay with the bombers. Now, what does he mean? We're sitting there above the bombers on the way to Germany. Now, if the bombers, the B-17s, if the little group is at 20,000 feet, we put one squadron at 21,000. By the way, a squadron is 16 airplanes. The B-17s only went 160 miles an hour. 160. Heck, we got automobiles almost doing 160 today. At that time, that was fast. But at 21,000 feet, if we did 160, we'd stall out. So we had to do 220, back and forth to stay with them. 220, back and forth. We put one squadron at 21,000, another squadron at 22,000, another squadron at 23, another squadron at 24. Oh, by the way, we had 4 squadrons. The 99th, the 100th, the 301st, and the 302nd. Here we are above these, going back and forth, going to Germany. And somebody hollered, bogeys at 9 o'clock. You look out at 9 o'clock, 15, 20 miles away, see all these little black specks, German fighters. Any other group would say, tally ho, let's go get them. Colonel Davis said, you keep your behind where you are. And by the way, when a colonel tells you what to do, you better do it. We stayed with the bombers. And quite naturally, the Germans very seldom came in to knock down the German the bombers. We lost very few bombers to German fighters. Very few. Not any at all. Maybe that kind of explains something. Discipline. Discipline. Follow the leader. Follow your commanding officer. Because our job was to protect those bombers, to get them from Italy to the bomb site and back again. It's all part of that. Next question.
All right, back to Edward Harris.
Was it hard to leave home and go to war?
Was it hard to go to war? No, because in World War II, everybody wanted to go to the Army. Germany was hated. Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. We didn't know where the heck Pearl Harbor was. Now, you got to remember, kids, we didn't have television like you have today. They told me Pearl Harbor. I had to go to the movies to see the newsreel to find out where in the heck Pearl Harbor was. Everybody wanted to go to the Army to fight Germany. And somebody said, well, why did you want to fly? Because as a pilot, I went first class. Kids say, what do you mean? What are you talking about? Well, there was a thing called a draft. If you're drafted as a black man, you went to the quartermaster. Heavy, nasty, filthy, dirty work. But as a pilot, went to pilot training. Oh, by the way, you only made $21 a month. Ooh, that's $21. Yeah, but cigarettes were 5 cents a pack. Gasoline was 10 cents a gallon. A dozen of eggs were 15 cents. A loaf of bread was a nickel. 5 cents. $21 went a long way. But as a pilot, through 9 months of training, I got $75 a month. And after 9 months, I became a second lieutenant. I got $150 a month. Now, what would you do? What would you take? $21 a month? Heavy, nasty, dirty work? Or $150 as a pilot with wings and a gold bar on your collar? Why I wanted to be a pilot? No sweat. I wanted to go first class. And excitement. It was exciting flying a plane, man. Hell, let's face it. It's just like driving a race car today, you know. Exciting. Today, I would be a pilot flying an F-16. Bingo. Or a new Raptor. The F-22. Some of you kids know about if you stayed up with it. That's what I'd be doing today. Hi there. Okay, next question, please.
Okay, back to Monterey.
What was your experience when you came back home?
What kind of experience? In relation to what?
Like social, how was it? Like when you came back to America?
I came back to racism, segregation, and discrimination. Below the Mason-Dixon line, by the way, every time you take the train from Detroit going to Atlanta, Georgia, the train would leave Detroit and get to Cincinnati. You change trains to the L and N. Blacks would have to sit at that coach right behind the coal-burning, belching locomotive. Below the Mason-Dixon line, we had to get on the back of the bus. Even, you've seen the pictures of Martin Luther King, the Freedom Riders. Okay, all hell broke loose, let's face it. After the war, it's the same thing. This is the reason why many of us walked and protested, and kids did a whole lot of things. Why, we helped to change this country, let's face it. Get to the place where you can go anywhere you want to go, do anything you want to do, but we helped change the world. Another question, please.
Okay, back to Edward Harris.
What is your opinion of how the world turned out today?
Boy, you kids ask some of the darndest questions. What do I think about the world? I'm frustrated because I thought that the world would be much, much better because internationally, now let's leave the United States and think about the world. You have television and you have Google. I would be hoping that there would be less tension in the world today. But things haven't turned out to be all that well. I can't go any further than that. I'm still frustrated where the world is with all the tension.
We'd like to introduce our, we have a couple people that you know, Alex, who are here in California. And they just come into the library, so I'd like to have them come up so you can see them on the camera.
There's George.
Hey, how you doing, man?
Hey, fella, how you doing? How you doing? How you doing?
Hey, I'm doing.
I'm doing fair to middling.
Also with George is Miss Edith Roberts. I believe you know Edith.
Well, howdy. Edith, how you doing? It's a pleasure. Looking good.
You are looking
It's a
good.
pleasure, Edith.
Yeah.
Ms. Roberts is the widow of Spanky Roberts, one of our commanding officers of the 332nd Fighter Group. Colonel Davis was the commanding officer, and Colonel Roberts was second in command. Greatly respected down through the years, above all and beyond. We call him Spanky from somewhere way back when, but everybody remembers Spanky Roberts.
Yeah.
I tell these young people, we spent years at Selfridge Air Force Base. That's where you got your wings at Tuskegee Army Airfield, and graduated, and we came up to Selfridge for overseas training before we went overseas to join Spanky and Colonel Davis. And I was at Selfridge when we got kicked out of Selfridge, literally, for trying to integrate the Officers Club in 1944. We had a two-star general come into Selfridge and tell us to our face that as long as he was in command, there would be no socialization between white and colored officers. 3 days later, they put all the black officers and our enlisted men, our mechanics were black, put us all on a Pullman train and sent us down to Waldoboro, South Carolina. But you see, we have to teach these young people today what went on before. And by the way, I tell these young people, I came up and I grew up on the backs of a lot of others, blacks who sacrificed. I grew up on the backs of Carter Woodson, W.B. Du Bois, all the people who went before me, Fred Douglass. Tuskegee Airmen didn't start off. We only came up and we had to do what we had to do in order to get another generation going, 2 or 3 generations. Thank God some of them have really progressed. We often say Malcolm, Martin Luther King, Medgar Evers, Manny Lou Hamer did not die in vain. Let's get another question for some of these young people.
Did being in the war make you more determined or change your view on discrimination against blacks?
No. Being in the war did, well, yes and no. Didn't change my attitude. Didn't change my attitude of fighting for my rights as a citizen, as a human being. The war just happened to extend it, made it possible for me to be more explicit. That's all. And didn't hurt, didn't help. But I hated segregation, even while I was in Atlanta, Georgia. I hated it. I hated it when I was in the Army, hated it when I came back, and we helped to prove it, helped change it. Thank you.
Okay, back to Monterey.
I'm an inspiring pilot, and I want to know, did you enjoy being a pilot?
I got news for you. Being a pilot was just like in your age, as somebody said, I want to put you in this racing car. And here's a Jag. I want you to run this car around the racing track, strap you in. Exciting? You darn right it was exciting. Just the whole idea of being a pilot. Across the world, you experience so many different cultures, you meet so many different people. But again, too, it's the discipline, framing of your mind, and learning how to join the system. See, we live in a system in the world. We live in a system, morally, economically, physically. It's a system that we live in. And you have to learn how to join. There's certain rules to live by. Today, you don't do drugs. You don't rob and steal. You stay in school, become a citizen, and make, be productive. The name of the game. Enjoy, because there's so much to enjoy in this society, in this life. I've been very lucky. God has been very good to me. God has been very good to me. I've been very honored, even to get this stage of life, to look back. I've done some crazy, stupid things, yeah. But he brought me across, and I still give him the honor. It's been a great life. Let's get another question.
Okay, back to Edward Harris.
Do you regret anything from World War II?
I don't regret anything. World War II in itself, I believe, some of these, Edith may have a different idea, a different attitude. I don't regret anything. I regret the fact that I got shot down. I regret the fact that I spent 9 months in Germany as a POW, but that itself was a productive thing because it gave me a completely different outlook on life. Changed me completely. More positive attitude of learning how to survive. I learned how to survive. Another question?
Okay, back to Monterey.
What were the conditions like inside of the planes?
Well, to tell you the truth, if you were sitting in a P-51 Mustang, it's just like sitting in your automobile. You're driving a car. Now, there are certain instruments, quite naturally. Certain instruments to control the airplane, just like certain instruments to control your automobile. You got a wheel, you got a lever, and literally, the cockpit of a P-51 is just like the size of your seat in a car. If you put your elbows up like this on each side of the airplane, only difference, the darn thing with 400 miles an hour and maximum. Today, F-22s go 1,000 miles, 1,200 miles an hour, much faster. They're still airplanes are airplanes, the mechanical, and you have to make them do what you want them to do. You don't let the darn thing fly itself. Another question?
How did your family feel when you left to go to war?
You go to war because you have a duty to defend your country. Maybe I explained this before. As I said before, you're in the Army, you're in the Navy, you're in the Marines, you're in a pilot. You go to war, this is your country, it's part of the country. And you do what you have to do. You're commanding, by the way, your major commanding officer is the president. And down the line to the Army, Air Force, Navy, Marines. And you rise to the occasion and you do what you have to do. As I told the class, maybe I said this before. This is my country, I'll go to war and I'll defend her. I'll do what I have to do. Follow directions, follow orders.
Well, I tried to get into the Cadet Corps, and I kind of hated the government because they said they didn't have blacks, they weren't that nice, though, flying airplanes.
Yes.
And they sent me home. And then later on, they found out to support you guys, they need to support people. And for every one pilot in training, you got 10 support people.
That's right. That's right.
But they don't give them the credit that you guys get.
Okay, here's one again. See, officers were the elite. Since we made all that money, here again, officers made money, enlisted men made. Now, there was a distinction. I ever tell everybody there were 1,000 men who actually got their wings. 1,000 black, 999, okay. But for every one pilot, there were 10 to 15 to 20 other people. Cooks, bottle washers, truck drivers, mechanics, doctors, nurses. So altogether, there are possibly 25 to 30,000 other blacks who are, quote, Tuskegee Airmen. And today, out of the 1,000 pilots, maybe 200 of us are still living. But out of the 25 to 30,000 other people who are, quote, Tuskegee Airmen, possibly 10,000 are still living. Got a lot of people who are, quote, Tuskegee Airmen. See, when something went wrong with that airplane, I didn't take my tools out and work on it. I took it to the man, to the mechanic. And these mechanics are the ones who really are the heroes. I tell everybody, I didn't know how the wheels worked. All I could do was pull the lever, and the wheels went down. Press the button, and the radio works, just like today. We do not give a lot of honor to a great number of people who are actual heroes of World War II. And by the way, whites in the Navy, whites in the Army, same thing happened. The enlisted personnel did not get the credit that they're supposed to get.
Mr. Jefferson, if you have any closing comments that you want to say to the students, and then we'll give each class a chance to say thank you to you.
Kids, stay in school. Stay in school.
All right, let's give the students a chance to say thank you. We'll start with Monterey.
Thank you, Alex. I really enjoyed having you here.
All right, and over to Edward Harris for your appreciation.
Well, I would like to speak for all of the students. Our students had to leave because it was the end of class, but we thank you so much, and we learned so much from you, so thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been an honor. It was a pleasure.
And thank you again to everyone who helped make this video conference happen, and hopefully we can do it again soon.
I am Edith Roberts. I am a member of the Tuskegee Airmen, Inc., the national organization. Our chapter here in Sacramento is named the George S. Spanky Roberts chapter, and George S. Spanky Roberts was my husband. He's now deceased. He's been dead since 1984, but he was the first cadet accepted in July of 1941, and he graduated in the first class of 5 in March 7th, 1942. This country was quite different from what it is now. And this was the first time that young black men, African American men, were allowed to fly military airplanes. Up to that point, the government would not accept blacks into their programs, even though there were two flight schools that the Army Air Corps had. But we were not eligible to go because of the color of our skin. So when the government was pressured to establish this program, they sent out the word across the country, and George and I were a couple of poor black kids trying to go to college in West Virginia State College. It's now West Virginia State University. We met there, and he had arrived a couple of years before me at the age of 15. So you hear us old people keep saying, like your parents and your grandmothers, go to school, because that's what our parents did to us. Go to school, learn, get a decent job. My mother would say there's nothing wrong with hard work, and believe me, she did it. She was a housekeeper, a cook, she washed clothes, she supported me through 4 years of college. I worked in college, I worked summers, and funny thing is, the only jobs I could get in Charleston, West Virginia as a young black college student was taking care of somebody's house or children, cleaning up their apartment or their home, that kind of thing. I could not get a job running the elevator in the department store. They weren't hiring blacks for that. George entered college at 15. He finished in 3.5 years, so he was 18 when he graduated from college. The word about this program came along the year after he graduated. And the only reason he was still on campus, he was working, was because his mother, who was a school teacher, wrote a letter. Mothers are sometimes crazy, and we do things for our kids, but she wrote to the college president and asked him to allow her son to stay an extra year. He was so young. And she said, I do not want him to come back to this town, which was Fairmont, West Virginia. I do not want my son to come back here because there's nothing for him. So that was true. He had two choices. He could bus tables or wash dishes at the local hotel, or he could go in the coal mines. And his mother didn't like those options. So she asked the president of the college to let him stay an extra year. It was that extra year when the word came about Tuskegee and this program. So he was the first one accepted, and it was 1941. I got a call that summer that I finished college. My grandparents lived in Charleston, West Virginia, and the call was from my hope-to-be husband saying, I got a call saying I've been chosen to go into the program, the flying program. Now, let me back up a little bit. He already had his license, a civilian license, because there are 6 black colleges that the government established civilian pilot training. So many of the Tuskegee Airmen started out as civilians with their flying license. But he said, I've been chosen to go into the military program. Only thing is, I can't be married. I said, oh? He says, will you wait? And I said, yeah, I guess. You know, of course, it had only been about 3 years that we had been planning this. Anyhow, he was in the first class, graduated, and we married that day he graduated. But for the next 27 years, we packed and unpacked and moved cross country, overseas. I raised 4 children. I was a colonel's wife for 16 years. Now, I don't know if you know about rank in the military, but a bird colonel, full colonel, is that step just before the 1-star general. And then it goes up to 3 and 4 stars. Being a colonel in 1952, when he was promoted, meant that I was Mrs. Colonel. I just didn't know it until we got to our first assignment after he returned from Korea. And I discovered I was supposed to be something. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to be because I was still me. He flew for 22 years of those 27. So as a pilot's wife in the military, you are father, chauffeur, cook, bottle washer, carpenter, electrician, nurse, doctor, you're whatever is needed because your husband is taking care of his job. He's off someplace. My husband would have loved to fly commercially, commercial airlines. Airlines were not hiring blacks. Even the airplane factories here in this country, a lot of time, were not hiring blacks, no matter how much training or education you had. So it was still very difficult. We remained in the service, but we were still facing the same kind of attitudes and all that the rest of the communities were doing, because many of the military people were from the South or from wherever and had very poor attitudes toward people of color. But this is what we faced all the time. You really never knew who was for you and who was against you, so to speak. And it was not easy.
I tried to get into this program back in the 1940s, and they told me with a lot of dirty words, go home, boy. Ain't no blacks flying airplanes. We don't have nothing like that going on in the Air Force. At that time, it was the Army Air Corps. And when I found out about this program, it was through black newspapers. And I went to New Orleans to get in, and they sent me back home. So then when they tried to draft me, I didn't go right away. My mother told me after the second letter, you better go, don't they gonna come lock you up. So then I went into the Air Force, into the Army Air Corps, and into the Army, and they trained me in quartermaster to be a dispatch rider on motorcycles. And after that, they sent me to Will Rogers Field in Oklahoma City. And then the government began to look back and say, hey, we're missing something. We don't have any support people for these black pilots. So then they came to all the Squadron Fs and got all the blacks with a high school education and sent us to Airplane Engine Mechanic School. Now, we came from all walks of life. 780 of us got a duffel bag, went to Tuskegee, got on a troop train, went to Lincoln Army Air Force Base, and we were the second class to go through the Airplane Engine Mechanic School. In 1925, after World War I, the government did a study on blacks, African Americans, and they came out with a study that said blacks were lazy. They were incompetent of doing high-tech work. Their brain was small, and they couldn't take orders and didn't know how to give orders. So, you see, that is in the history books as far as the government is concerned. It had never been taken out. But we have proven that we can do better than being just what you think we are. We can do a lot. I retired on KC-135s and B-52s. How many of you know what those airplanes are? KC-135 was an air refueler. The B-52 was an 8-engine bomber right out here at Mesa Air Force Base. Now, that's the best the Air Force had. How can I be so dumb that I was in charge of maintenance and launch and recovery? So I couldn't be too out of the woods on it. And that's why I tell you, prove to the people what you can do.
The Tuskegee experience was really a civil rights activity. Martin Luther King was a little boy, literally. He was a child in the 40s, and it was in the 60s when he hit the media. He was only 29 then. 20 years before Dr. King and Mrs. Parks with their activities. This is what the Tuskegee Airmen were also doing. There was an opportunity, and they were not expected to succeed, but they did, and they did it so well that, well, the rest is history, so they say.